Hello, I'm Sarah Lister from Sheffield Digital, and today I'm talking to Ryan Brooks, who is a Senior Technical Architect at Ministry of Justice UK. Ryan, what was your route into this role?
So I guess I've come from a pretty traditional background of going through playing with computers when I was really young, getting into software engineering, actually building Flash first because everyone has to do that at some point. Go to university, doing CS, computer science, and then starting off as a junior developer, mid-level developer, kind of going that path. I worked as a contractor consultant for a little bit, doing product management and design. And that was where I started doing, I guess, more of the higher level architectural decisions around coding. And then from that, I did one of my contracts was with the Department for Education. And that was my first time I really saw technical architects as a role, because all my previous experience was in tiny companies where you tend to just have one or two people doing all of the things. So yeah, and after I saw that, the job came up at MOJ, and I was like, I could probably do that, and that kind of took me in there. I guess it's worth saying that technical architect means a ton of different things to different people. Even in MOJ, different technical architects work in different ways. So I always kind of call myself a hands-on technical architect because my background's been in software engineering and development. There's also, I guess, people who maybe would describe themselves as solutions architects, who are maybe looking at different units of like things in the cloud that you could join together, or higher level, how do you join services together? So the actual title of technical architect is pretty generic. Maybe it just means we draw diagrams.
It does sound very snazzy. Why does this type of work appeal to you?
So I think the main thing for me is that there's lots of people involved. So technical architecture, you would think it's a deeply technical thing where you're, I guess, just writing on a computer or drawing diagrams as a joke. So I'm just going to make it 10 times on this call. But actually, I spend most of my time on calls talking to people. Most of the things I've been involved in that have felt good have been when I've been kind of getting people, brokering agreement between two different people, maybe as a technical person and someone in the product team or in another team, and you're trying to figure out what we actually need. So I guess most of the things that I'm doing, there's not really one right answer, and it's quite nice to traverse that. Maybe it's just a fear of me being wrong, and if I do a job where I can't be wrong because there isn't a right answer, that's better. I also quite like there's quite a long feedback loop. So when you're doing software engineering, you get really short feedback loops. You write a test, it passes or it fails. Whereas with the kind of architectural decisions, because there isn't one right answer, you're kind of trying to get to a place, and you have to look back over the last 3 months or a year and say, well, are all of these decisions taking us in the right direction? And I find that quite nice because it forces me to kind of reflect on what I do rather than get carried away with day-to-day stuff. Yeah, and the final thing is that it's super varied. Every day is different, pretty much.
Actually, we have got a question on that about how I was actually going to ask you, how much does a typical working day vary for you? And maybe if you could talk about all the other work and projects that you have as well to bring in that variety.
Yeah, so days are generally pretty different. So I guess it's worth saying in civil service, at the moment, I'm really lucky. I'm working part-time because obviously we're in a pandemic, and civil service is really supportive of work-life balance. So being able to have a little bit more time when I'm not working is kind of nice. For the days when I am working, everything we do in civil service pretty much is agile. So we've got sort of standard sprint ceremonies that we do on a morning. Mine happens to sit around 10 o'clock. But then it will often be a mixture of kind of getting involved with pull requests and kind of helping the developers make sort of, I guess, mid-level technical architecture decisions. So thinking about how the lumps of code work together, going off and talking with suppliers or third parties that maybe want to integrate with APIs that we're building, and helping to kind of specify, kind of shape the work that we're doing over the next few months. So we always try and have a pretty kind of fuzzy idea of what we're going to do a long time in the future, and then a really concrete idea of what we're going to do next sprint or the sprint after. So again, in government, we try and have multifunctional teams or multidisciplinary teams. So we've got a product owner who their job is to care about this, and I just try and translate some of the technical requirements into that so that we deal with things like technical debt regularly. Yeah, and other than that, it's trying to engage with the community. So we have things like communities of practice where people give talks, and I kind of involved in some community things outside of MOJ, and yeah, we kind of that's I think a good thing. So I get to do a little bit of that at work as well.
And do you normally leave your weekends free of work, or does it eat some time?
So I used to be a contractor, and when you're contracting or consulting, you're normally counting your hours. If you're really unlucky, you're counting your minutes, but counting hours or counting days. So I got into quite a good or bad habit of really tracking my time well and shutting a door. And when I'm not working, like if I'm not getting paid, I shouldn't have been working. So I think I'm quite good at stopping work. And yeah, it's a cultural thing, but all the companies I've worked for have been pretty good about saying, if it's not working hours, you shouldn't really be looking at Slack. You shouldn't be replying to emails. And I've been really lucky while we've all been working from home, because we've got a room that we've made into the study, and you can just close the door on that, walk away, and not have things kind of reminding you about work. So yeah, I'm pretty slow at replying to emails normally, but if it's the weekend, it's not going to happen.
Are you keen to continue working from home after the lockdown eases up, etc.?
Yeah, so I've done quite a lot of remote working before I did some contracting for DfE and then got this job at Ministry of Justice. I was fully remote for probably 4 years before that, and there's lots of things I really enjoy about that. I mean, I guess it's worth saying I'm in a massive position of privilege because we've got this room, we can like close things off. I've got a nice big monitor, a good setup with a standing desk, all the stuff that a lot of people don't have. But mostly I keep on saying I like working remotely, and remote first is a really healthy approach to take as an organization or to look for. But that doesn't mean we should all be locked down and never have any social contact with anyone. And I've definitely found lockdown and fully remote kind of COVID working much harder than remote was before then. So there's I guess there's some principles around things like having headsets and being able to, like, if one person is remote, everyone treats it like it's remote. So you're all on separate calls, and writing down your decisions, and yeah, just kind of making decisions more slowly that I'm hoping we take and like carry on after we're able to go in the office. But I am really looking forward to going for coffee with people.
Yes, I think it's going to be nice for the Geek Brekkies to eventually transfer back to its original setting.
Yeah, definitely.
So how does your previous education and experience relate to your current role?
So that's a good question. So I've got a bachelor's in computer science, and then I did a little bit of postgrad research. So I guess I've taken a pretty traditional path to getting to being a technical architect, except for most of my roles have been with small companies, little startups or kind of post-startup growing organizations where there isn't a TA. So when I applied for this role, I was actually pretty nervous about whether I'd be able to get it. It's always nice to have imposter syndrome when you're applying for a job, because I guess my experience was making architectural decisions, but as a developer, and I had some misconceptions that as a technical architect I should know all this stuff like TOGAF and be able to draw diagrams that are this big on a whiteboard first time. I've thankfully learned that's not the case. So yeah, I think having the experience of just making architectural decisions while you're engineering or developing or whatever we want to call it, is really the main thing. It's just kind of weighing up what we think is a good idea and writing that down afterwards. Mm-hmm. And actually, most of what I do is just asking questions and getting other people to make the decisions. And it's just getting the right people in the room to do that. But maybe don't tell anyone that.
I've heard on the grapevine that you're interested in coaching and that you have some coaching skills. So, do you bring elements of that into how you work and communicate with people?
Yeah, so I did my coaching qualification years and years ago when I first started being a line manager. And I got my first report and realized I had no idea what to do and assumed that I was going to do something terrible and that person was going to end up destitute and hate me forever. And I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to do like a management course. So I did this coaching qualification, and I think it's probably the most valuable thing that I've done. I've done a bunch of technical qualifications, which have, I guess, enabled me to get jobs, but the coaching one is something I use kind of every day to day. I think I'm maybe when I was younger, I was quite forthright about what the answer was. And the main thing with coaching is that it teaches you about kind of active listening. In a pure coaching session, the coach doesn't really inject any guidance or decision making or any of their experiences. They're just kind of asking questions to help the other person make their own decisions and kind of expand their understanding of it. And I've found that really useful when you're doing pretty much any discussion at work, but particularly when you're thinking about bigger things where there isn't necessarily a right answer. I definitely recommend any kind of coaching. I won't go off and ramble about it, but being coached when you have a question that you're trying to answer is particularly useful. I've had a professional coach a couple of times, like when I was thinking about whether I should leave Oxford, where I was living, and move up to Sheffield so that I could go and do more cycling and running and all the things I enjoyed, or whether I should double down and move to London and get into the rat race and be more professionally oriented. And yeah, having someone else ask you the right questions to make you realize what the answer is really useful.
Yeah, I think it can be really empowering, because I think we tend to look to others, we kind of talk to others about the dilemma and then we expect for other people to kind of say do this or do that, but actually we can figure it out for ourselves. Just take some powerful questioning to kind of get to what you really want and to make a firm decision. What other core skills does your job require?
So I guess the main thing is being able to kind of do decision making in the absence of any hard evidence. And this is going to probably make some people cringe because data-driven decisions are really nice. Yeah, you want to be able to say, we make a hypothesis and this happens, measure it and see what the answer is, or look at some analytics data or some performance data and know what you should do. I found most of the harder questions and the questions that maybe other people in the business have struggled to answer, where there is an absence of evidence, and you've just got to kind of put your flag in the sand and say, well, this is what we believe, so we should take a bit of a gamble and then be able to look back and see if it was the right thing. I know when I was kind of, I guess, a bit earlier in my career, I really struggled if there wasn't an obvious right answer. So maybe it's a bit ironic that I enjoy doing this now. So yeah, that's probably the main thing. In fact, no, that's the second main thing. The main thing is sociability, or being able to talk with other people. Especially in larger organizations, you always end up with silos, and whether it's broken down by different groups doing different technologies or being based in different locations. The main thing is getting people to talk, or being able to just walk up to someone virtually at the moment and say, I don't really know what you do and I don't know how your system works, but I want to do this, and not being scared that you'll get shot down.
How do you think that you have learned those skills?
So the sociability one may be a little bit forced. I think I come across as being extroverted, but every time I do something like this, for example, I find it always takes energy. And years ago, there was a really nice description of introverted versus extroverted I heard, which is if you're extroverted, you kind of gain energy from being in social situations, whereas if you're introverted, you expend it. And I definitely find that, if I'm doing a lot of social interactions over a week, I'll get to the weekend and I should be, lying on a sofa watching terrible TV. And so I guess the sociability side is more habit building. and kind of having some allies, having people at work who I trust and I can talk to and say, I feel a bit nervous about doing this thing. And you find that pretty much every time they go, well, you can definitely do that. And then, well, maybe I can. Yeah, decision making is kind of the same thing. It's just an acquired skill of going, it's probably not all going to catch fire. I know when I started, I assumed if I made a bad decision, the company would fail and I'd again be destitute. Everything ends up with us not having a job at some point. And then you realize that pretty much anything you do, you can recover from, particularly if you're kind of being agile and testing your risky assumptions early on. Doesn't matter if you make the wrong decision. Hopefully your team is supportive. Yeah, that helps.
Mm-hmm. What do you most enjoy about working at the Ministry of Justice?
I guess there's two things. One at the moment is that being civil service, there's a big focus on kind of work-life balance, well-being, and kind of the human side of employing a load of resources. So like during COVID, there's been a lot of support for kind of mental health and looking at how we could open up the office for people who were maybe in a position where they didn't have a great working position at home, and kind of support for families. So yeah, like when we have obviously a load of Zoom calls, and I don't think there's been one in the last few months where there haven't been a child at some point, and that should be fine because we are all humans and families exist and they're probably a good thing. And I have worked in other places where there was that idea of professionalism, where it was more about whether you're wearing a suit than whether you were doing a good job. So I think that's probably one of the things. But also everything we do is kind of in the open. So one of the government principles or GDS principles is that working in the open. So everything we do is open source where it can be, and we're able to talk and kind of promoted to talk about what we do. So yeah, like talking about things here and going off and talking in other forums is really good. And we get to learn by talking about the problems we're having rather than just pretending that everything is perfect all the time, which I don't think it is anywhere.
How do you usually approach challenges when they come up, whether that's in a specific work context or more generally?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess my first thing is that I have learned to fight my initial reaction of feeling frustrated. And again, this is a personality trait that I've realized over the years that I have, is I often come up with the thing that I think is the answer, and then I kind of become frustrated that we haven't solved it already. You know, it's like you tell someone something, well, we all know, so let's just move on. And that's not how humans work. You know, you have to go down the journey. And so a lot of the things I have to deal with in challenging situations is around slowing down how quickly I expect to see results and figuring out how I'm going to affect that change. And the main thing, or the two main things I've seen to do that is journaling. So just kind of writing down freeform what I'm trying to do and why I'm annoyed or why I think it should be different. And using that as a bit of a kind of a rubber duck. It kind of, as I'm writing down all my assumptions come out, I'm like, actually, this is a stupid idea. I shouldn't be doing this anyway. And kind of the extension of that, which is talking with other people. So it leads nicely into second time, I'm going to say you should definitely get a coach, but kind of peer groups, having other people in a similar situation, or maybe someone who takes a kind of mentoring position of they've done this sort of thing before and you can just bounce ideas off them. I found they're the two things, and you can solve pretty much any problem if you talk to people about it and slow things down.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, actually, because they're really simple tools, very effective, but not always the most talked about or the most obvious. So finally, what advice can you offer to people who like the sound of your job, but perhaps don't know where to begin with their career change or career development?
So I've had a chance to think about this before, and I think there's three things. The first thing is don't be intimidated. And I guess that's because I was pretty intimidated when I was applying for this. Technical architecture, or being a technical architect, because it varies so much by the company or even by the project, there's undoubtedly something you can bring to it. So we have at MOJ, we've got some TAs who've got development backgrounds, we've got TAs who don't have a development background, and they're both doing great things. You know, they bring different things, and I couldn't do the job that some of our non-developer TAs could do, and they probably couldn't do the job that I'm doing at the moment. And yeah, so yeah, mostly just don't be intimidated. It is likely that the role ends up kind of becoming what you are anyway. And kind of, I guess the follow on from that is that there's loads of great resources and books. There's software architecture as a discipline is starting to mature. I'm saying this really slowly because I'm sure there's some architects who've been around for ages who are like, it's been matured for years. But getting away from this idea of it being a very formal enterprisey thing to something that smaller and mid-sized organizations should be thinking about. And that kind of lowers the barrier in the same way as we have done for engineering, where it's like, oh, well, actually, there are ways that you can be a good architect without you being stood in a suit working for Microsoft. And there's like one of them, we'll put some in the show notes, but things like the Architect Path is a good site that's got a whole list of books that you might want to consider, kind of breaks down what the profession is and where you might want to look. So yeah, it's much easier now to think about what it might be than it was even 5 years ago. And I guess the third thing, because I did say there were three, is come and talk to me. I'm on the Sheffield Digital Slack and Twitter and a bunch of other places, and I'm always happy to talk about or rant about my experiences, depending on what day you catch me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ryan.
It's been a pleasure.